When you think about the brain and how it's built, and then you think about the exact technology that they've used to create AI, isn't it very, very similar? And if so, if it is similar, what does that say about humans' role in the future?
It's similar, but it's not the same, which is why with AI you get what we call jagged intelligence, meaning that it can do something so extraordinarily smart and then in the next moment give an answer that's weird and doesn't make any sense. AI still is doing this. It's not it thinking like we think. Okay, why? It's because AI, as we think about it now, really started, of course, decades and decades ago, where people said, look, you've got all these billions of cells, neurons in the brain that are connected to each other. What if we ignore all that complexity and we just say, look, imagine that you have units that are connected to each other. We're going to forget about, a single cell in the brain is as complicated as a city. It's got the entire human genome. It's trafficking millions of proteins. Let's put all that aside. Just imagine it's a circle and it's connected to other cells and each connection has a certain strength. And that's what we call an artificial neural network. Now that went off in its own direction. And the kind of amazing, surprising part is how successful it's been to just get rid of all the detail. But it's still super different than what human brains are like. So just an example, this thing I mentioned at the very beginning about how we're a team of rivals under the hood. You've got all these different competing neural networks that are trying to drive your behavior and so on. The fact that we're emotional, the fact that we are driven by different appetites, whether food or sexuality or whatever it is. But your ChatGPT, you don't want that in the ChatGPT. So it's just an artificial neural network, many layers deep, and it's extraordinary at what it does. But it's so different than a human. For example, the fact that it's read everything on the planet and remembers it. And you haven't. You would need to lead 1,000 lifetimes to read that much. And of course, you wouldn't remember much of it. It's very different is the point I'm making. They both have converged on something that we would call intelligence, but it's a pretty different structure, even though AI was inspired by the brain.
That's what Jeffrey Hinton was telling me. He was telling me that much of the breakthroughs that have made AI what it is today came from understanding how the brain works.
Yeah, but that's interesting because Hinton is incentivized to say that, but a neuroscientist...
He's incentivized to say that.
People doing AI, of course, are paying a lot of attention to how this is structured like the brain, because before that, people would do things like probability theory or rules, or they would try to do AI by trying to say, okay, if this, then do that. But when people started doing artificial neural networks, that led to a lot of success. I'm only pointing out that the artificial neural network looks a lot like the brain on the surface. You say, hey, you've got units and you've got connections. But beyond that, there's a lot of differences.
And why are those differences significant as it relates to what's possible?
Because what we've developed is this a new species, essentially, that is incredibly impressive, but it ain't a human brain. It's different than a human brain. There may be all kinds of similarities, things that we even come to understand are similar, but there are so many differences. Here's an example. We humans do one trial learning all the time, meaning if I say, or when you were a kid and your mom said, hey, Stephen, this is a pomegranate, you say, okay, pomegranate, got it. But you can't, when you're training up an artificial neural network, like at OpenAI or Gemini or Anthropic, you have to give thousands or millions of examples of everything for it to learn anything. There's no one trial learning on those systems, and they have to be trained at the cost of billions of dollars. Then they can do a run where you ask a question and it answers the question. But brains in the real world don't have that luxury of having a training phase and then an action phase. We have to learn on the fly. It's very different.
So I guess the pertinent question is, does it change what's possible for the brain versus the artificial neural networks we see in AI? Is there some limitation based on what you've just said that means this brain in front of me, this human brain in front of me, will always be better than the AI at something? Because I'm trying to track forward about what this means for the future of humans.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting question that we'll have to see, but it's clearly the case that we know what it is to be a human from the inside. And when I'm making a model of you and who you are, and you're making a model of me, we have assumptions about what it is like to be a human. AI only watches human behavior from the outside. And so it can tell a lot of great stuff, but it doesn't really know what it is to be a human. So if I ask it some question about what would it be like if this or that happened, it can answer based on observing lots of things, but it can only ever know from the outside.
In terms of why that matters.
Yeah.
Because, if I ask my AI, my fiance's being like this today, or if I ask my best friend, my fiance's been like this today, both of them give me the same useful answer, it doesn't really matter what's going on.
I agree with you. I agree. I'm actually writing a new podcast on this about what you can tell from the outside and what you can tell from the inside and whether that difference matters. Look, an example is, I last year got a Tesla with full self-driving, and I was watching as it was full self-driving. I was coming up on a very complicated traffic situation. I thought, whoa, what's my car going to do here? How's it possibly going to understand? But what it did is it slowed down and came to a stop, which was exactly the right thing. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Algorithmically, it might think of it very differently than I am thinking about the situation. It doesn't matter. It comes to the same conclusion, ends up in the same place. Yeah, I agree. We have yet to see where these differences matter and what it is to be a human. But I can tell you one thing, we care about other humans. So here's my little prediction, is that there's going to be actually a renaissance in things like live theater and live performances. When things first came out, like Napster, everyone thought, okay, that's the death of concerts. Like that's the death of musicians, right? But in fact, you look at a Taylor Swift concert, gajillions of people there paying lots of money. Like everyone loves the thing. Why? Because they're going to see the real Taylor Swift in person. And I have noticed, I give a lot of talks on the road. I have noticed an increase in the number of talks since AI came out a few years ago. The first thing that my friend said to me is, hey, did you know, David, that you can, use 11 Labs and Hey Gen, and you can make an avatar of yourself, and you can use your voice and use ChatGPT to generate what you're going to say and have a fully virtual version of you. He said, my friend who gives talks too, he said, maybe we can start doing this and do virtual talks. I said, nobody's going to want that. In fact, what's happened is more people want to fly us across the country to have us stand there in person, because it really matters to see fellow humans. And I think that's only going to increase.
I completely agree with you. I think it's so funny. I did a post on my LinkedIn the other day saying that maybe the interesting paradox or interesting outcome of AI is that every other iteration of technology made us less human. And maybe the intelligence now has gotten to a point where it's now forcing us to be more human, because that is all that kind of remains in a way, that maybe the technology has gotten so good. Like social media didn't make us more human in any capacity, but maybe this is the moment where it goes, we've got this now. Yeah. Go do what only you as a human can do, which is go out there, Taylor Swift, and sing in front of people IRL. Yeah. Go and do something in the real world. Even for nurses and doctors, maybe they shouldn't be filling out admin and paperwork anymore. Maybe they should be holding your hand and giving you, in real life care that only a human could do.
I totally agree.
And so maybe that's the positive upside to all of this is finally, we've been on this journey with technology, and finally it's delivered upon its promise.
I totally agree. And by the way, AI relationships, by one estimate, there's 1 billion people having relationships with AI, like a girlfriend or boyfriend kind of thing. Okay. And so for people like us who grew up before that existed, we think, oh my gosh, that's weird. But in fact, I think it might become helpful because it can be a sandbox as long as we have the proper feedback. In the end, we have millions of years of evolution driving us towards being with the person you love, touching another human being, watching the stars, taking her out to dinner with your parents, we care about that. And so this worry that people sometimes talk about, oh, people are just going to be on their phone with their AI relationship, I don't think is realistic for almost everybody, because it gives us the chance to, hopefully sandbox some things about relationships and get over some dumb things with relationships. And then we can actually be with our fellow human.
Counter argument would be that maybe there's going to be a bifurcation, a splitting of society where some people are going to become even more addicted to the technology because the AI is now much smarter at retention. I know exactly what I need to say to you based on your brain, Dr. David, to make you not put this device down.
Yes, but fundamentally, I want to be in contact with my wife. I mean, that's the evolution of hundreds of millions of years, is that I want to make babies. I want to go and eat dinner with somebody. And as much as I might find my phone appealing, I'm not going to sit it across from me at a nice Italian restaurant and sit there like that. So
I mean, a lot of people do. Me and my fiance, when we're at restaurants, because we have a rule where we don't touch our phones when we're at date night.
Excellent.
And I have to look around and I'm like, oh my God, how are all these guys getting away with this? But do you see what I'm saying? Some people, they just have a different sort of proclivity, or they have a different wiring, which means that instead of doing the hard thing of going out there and going on a first date and being rejected, pornography or a virtual wife might be a substitute for that.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. There will be bifurcations. One question, I don't know the answer to, but one question is, what would that person have done in previous generations? Is it really the case that person would have gone out and had a great, successful relationship, or would they always have had troubles relating to people?
Yeah, I sat with a few neuroscientists and experts that studied dopamine. Dr. Anna Lemke was one.
Yeah. She's my colleague.
She's your colleague, yeah. And she talks a lot about how we all have different types of addictive substances. And we will think heroin's addictive for everybody and alcohol's addictive. And I used to think of it on a spectrum. But actually she said for her addiction was romantic erotic novels.
Yeah.
And she almost ruined her relationship because of erotic novels, which is something that I would read and just throw in the bit maybe this new technology is particularly addictive to a certain type of person.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think we're going to see that with everything. I mean, the wild part about human society is that there's so little that we have in common, meaning everybody is really different. This is something I've studied in my lab for decades, is this issue about what are the subtle differences from person to person? Not big things like, oh, this person is a psychopath or this person has schizophrenia, but the more subtle things. I'll just give you an example. Like if I ask you to imagine, to visualize, let's say an ant on a purple and white tablecloth crawling towards a jar of red jelly. Do you see that in your head like a movie, or do you have no particular picture at all, or somewhere in between? What do you experience?
An ant crawling towards a jar of jelly.
Yes.
Yeah, I see a big black ant, and then this jar of jelly is overflowing down the sides with a wooden lid on top of it, and the ant is almost there.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you have so what you have, I'm just guessing where you are, but you are on the end of the spectrum that we call hyperphantasia, which means you have very rich visualization. You're seeing it like a picture or a movie. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. I happen to be at the other end of that spectrum called aphantasia, where I don't have any visual images at all. I don't see things visually in any way. And it turns out the whole population is spread evenly along this spectrum. I'll just give a quick side note, which is that for many years I've been talking with Ed Catmull about this. He's the guy who started Pixar films. So he's got all the patents on how to do ray tracing and how to make these beautiful animated characters, right? Ed Catmull is aphantasic like I am. And when he learned about this, he got really interested and he gave the questionnaire to everybody at Pixar. And it turns out many of his best animators and directors are aphantasic. They don't picture anything inside their heads. Now, this seems surprising and strange, right? But it turns out that if you are an aphantasic kid, you're going to become better at drawing because you have to really pay attention to the subject out there and really have a dialogue with the page with your pencil. Whereas a kid who's hyperphantagic might say, oh, I know what a horse looks like, and just draws it. Okay. So anyway.
That tracks.
Yeah. So it turns out there's a real spectrum across the population, meaning inside your head and my head, we're having pretty different experiences. But I've studied this along dozens of different axes, and everyone's got different things going on. Just as one example, do you know about synesthesia? Have you ever heard of this?
Is that forgetting or something?
No, synesthesia is having a blending of the senses. So someone with synesthesia might look at letters and it triggers a color experience in their head. So they look at J and that triggers green, and they look at M and that triggers blue, and whatever. It's different for each person. Or you might hear music and it triggers a visual experience, or you might taste something, it puts a feeling on your fingertips or whatever. It's a blending of the senses. At least 3% of the population has this. It's not a disease or a disorder. It's just an alternative perceptual reality.
So if you have aphantasia, does that mean that you can't picture your kids?
It means that the way I picture them is not visually. I mean, there's sort of a very general, but for me, it's more motoric imagery and, and audio imagery. I'm imagining talking to them and being with them and being close to them, and probably some olfactory imagery, meaning how they smell and the whole thing. I have a very rich notion of what it is to be with my kids, but it's a pretty terrible visual picture. Not much there.
So I imagine people at home have done that same experiment while they were listening. Could they picture an ant walking towards a jar of jam? And if they find themselves on the aphantasia, I can't remember the two.
Aphantasic, yeah, or hyperphantagic.
So hyperphantagic is you can picture it, aphantasic is you can't.
Yes.
What does that potentially suggest about
Nothing. Now, here's the interesting part. So we've done lots of studies about what this translates to in terms of your capacities in the world. Nothing. Why does it translate to nothing? It's because you can accomplish tasks in 100 different ways. And so some people are doing things very visually. Other people are doing it where they're like picturing it with their motor systems. Others are doing it, as I mentioned, with sound or smell or whatever, or others are doing it just purely conceptually, just thinking through how the steps would go. But there's nothing obvious other than this thing I mentioned about visual artists often being aphantasic. Otherwise, you can kind of accomplish anything.
I heard that you might have, after many, many decades of people debating this, you might have figured out the reason why we dream.
Yeah. It's actually after millennia of people debating this. This is the cool part. So, okay, remember I mentioned earlier that if you go blind, the visual cortex at the back of the brain gets taken over by hearing and by touch and by other things, and it's no longer visual cortex. Well, what we realized is that because we live on a planet that rotates into darkness for half the time, the visual cortex, the visual part of your brain, is at a disadvantage. So what I realized is that the purpose of dreaming is to defend the visual territory from takeover from the other senses. So every 90 minutes, you've got this very ancient thing in your midbrain that shoots random activity into the visual system, and only the visual system, only this very tiny part of the visual system. Every 90 minutes, you just blast random activity in here. And the reason is you are just defending that territory against takeover. Now, the reason that all this came together is because our colleagues at Harvard did an experiment where they took normally sighted people and they blindfolded them tightly for 60 minutes. And it turns out that 60 minutes was sufficient for the visual cortex to start responding to sound and to touch. You could start seeing that takeover happening after 60 minutes. And that's when we realized, wow, this part of the brain really needs a way of defending itself. Now, because the brain is a natural storyteller, if you blast random activity in there, it'll, put that together in some sort of visual story about what's happening, mostly based on what connections are hot from the day. But that's why we dream.
So we dream to stop the other parts of our brain overtaking the visual part of our brain, overpowering it, and I guess ultimately making us go blind.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If we lived on a different kind of planet that did not rotate into darkness, then we presumably wouldn't dream.
Would we even need to close our eyes? I mean,
not necessarily. Yeah. It may be that in the sleeping state, in the state of deep sleep, the brain is doing particular things like taking out the trash and cleaning some things up. That might be necessary. Who knows? But yeah, I don't think we would need to dream. We wouldn't need to blast random activity in there. If our eyes were always open, for example, and it was always light out.
Are there other examples in the animal kingdom which
yes.
support this?
Yes. Thank you for asking that. This is why this new theory about why we dream is taken off, because we can make quantitative predictions across animal species. So for example, in our last paper, we looked at 25 different species of primates, apes and monkeys. And we looked at how plastic their brains are. In other words, how flexible the whole circuitry was, and how much they dream at night, which you can tell by looking at rapid eye movements. When you dream at night, your eyes are shooting back and forth like that. It's called REM, rapid eye movement sleep. So you can measure that in other animals, their eyes moving back and forth. So we correlated how plastic the brain is and how much dream sleep you have. And it correlates perfectly, which is to say humans, which are the most plastic, have dream sleep all the time. And by the way, when you're an infant, you have dream sleep for half of your sleep time, 50% of the time. As you get older, you get less and less dream sleep because you just don't need it as much anymore. But anyway, when we look across species, it correlates perfectly. If you're a monkey that drops into the world sort of already fully baked and you don't need to have much plasticity, you don't have much dream sleep either.
Interesting. Seems like a very strange thing. It sounds like a very strange thing for the brain to do, but it also is perfectly plausible based on everything you've said.
Yeah, and by the way, I just want to mention dreaming is across the animal kingdom. Everybody dreams. All animals dream at night.
Even like animals at the bottom of the ocean.
Yes. It's harder to measure stuff all the way at the bottom of the ocean, but fish do have what is equivalent to dream sleep, where you're just zapping activity in there. And by the way, even animals that have gone blind, like there's a mammal called the blind mole rat, which lives in darkness and has eyes, but they're blind because over evolutionary time, they've lost vision, but they still dream because the dream circuitry is so ancient. This is so ancient that all animals have to defend themselves against the darkness by keeping their visual systems going. And so even though the animal went blind, the rest of the brain didn't catch up. I mean, that's how evolution goes.
Funny. It's funny because it's kind of like that evolution gave us this TV that comes on at nighttime when the real TV, our real life, turns off. And it just puts on this fake TV set to keep that part of the brain doing something so that it doesn't deteriorate and atrophy.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Which means dreams are quite pointless outside of just protecting our neurological matter.
I suspect so. It might be that the particular pathways that get traveled down, maybe there's some meaning there. My own suspicion is that it's like if I went to your bookshelf and I picked a random book up and I flipped to a random page and picked a random sentence, I might find some meaning in that. I might say, oh, that was just the sentence that I needed to hear. But it's not really. It's just that it has some meaning to me. Anyway, the point is, if you blast random activity in there, I might dream about something where I wake up and say, oh, that was pretty useful. But the thing that I think gets overlooked is that most dreams are totally useless and bizarre.
Dr. David, what is the most important thing we haven't talked about that we should have talked about as it specifically relates to people that are trying to improve their lives, get better at whatever their subjective mission is? And the brain.
There are probably a lot of things, but I got to say, the thing that I've been thinking about so much lately is just about our political interfacing with one another. And so I do feel that really learning the skills of dialogue with our fellow humans, where we listen to what they're saying and try to better understand what their internal model is. It's not equivalent to agreeing with them, but it is saying, hey, somebody's coming from this perspective. Let me see if I can understand that. I think that matters a lot. And I also think that because we're so highly predisposed for in-groups and out-groups, it's really useful to figure out how to complexify those relationships. Meaning, how do you figure out all the things that cross-cut in the relationship so that you say, hey, you know what? I shouldn't dismiss this person as a member of my out-group right away because actually they belong to the same group I do, and they love surfing as much as I do, and they love golden retriever dogs, and they, grew up in my hometown and whatever. Like finding those things explicitly helps the brain to keep these circuits on that are involved in seeing another person as a person. We have all the social circuitry that is all about understanding other people, and when things get dehumanized, that actually gets dialed way down. When we look at, let's say a homeless person or a drug addict or someone who we think of as our enemy or an outgroup, that gets dialed down. So we don't think of them as a person anymore. We think of them as an object to get around. Mm-hmm. So this is what I think is really important, is figuring out what we can do to keep that social circuitry still going, which includes the things like eye contact and conversation. And this is one of the most important things we can do as citizens in a rapidly changing world.
As it relates to things like dementia, which I know is a fear that a lot of people have. A lot of people are suffering with dementia. I think increasingly, in fact. If I was trying to stave off dementia, what advice would you give me, David?
Yeah, keep your brain active. Keep it active till the day you die. Take on new challenges. And as soon as you get good at something like, Sudoku, drop it and pick up something that you're not good at.
And in simple terms, why?
It's because you're forcing your brain to make changes. Otherwise, your brain says, okay, I got this. I got the world. I understand what's going on. There's no real particular need for me to change. And the fact is that the structure of the brain is always degenerating. And when you get something like a disease like Alzheimer's disease, it degenerates much faster. And what you want to always be doing is building new roadways and fashioning new paths that had not been walked before.
So that there's more to degenerate, which gives me more left over once that degeneration begins?
I think that's a good way to look at it. Your pathways are falling apart. And if you can build new pathways, which requires effort, you have to actually care and pursue and do the thing, even as parts of the thing have fallen apart, you still have ways of getting from A to B.
What do I need to stay away from in terms of chemicals or supplement, I don't know, or food, or I don't know?
Yeah, obviously there's just been a lot more emphasis on getting good sleep and good diet, and this stuff really matters. I think that's really useful for the brain. I mean, it's fascinating to watch what's happened in the latest generation in terms of alcohol consumption. I live up in Silicon Valley, and there's a lot of people who have wineries just north of me, and they're like selling half their acreage. It's absolutely fascinating to see what's happening there. I will say, I have a friend who's in her 20s who said that she's in favor of bringing drinking back. Why? Because she said, we go to parties and everything's so awkward and no one knows how to talk to one another. And so they're missing something else. They're missing the dumb mistakes category that we all got to enjoy growing up. So it is a really interesting balance of how abstemious one wants to become.
David, we have a closing tradition where the last guest leaves a question for the next guest, not knowing who they're leaving it for. Question left for you is, what do you wish most for our planet over the next 10 years?
The whole list or the top 10. Yeah.
Can't be world peace.
I think I would come back to this piece about the complexification of relationships, which is to say, if we could just get a little bit smarter about understanding people in our outgroups as being humans with lives, with their own thing going on. Doesn't mean we have to love them or agree with them, but if we can just get to that point, I don't think we'll ever hit world peace, but at least we'd have slightly less polarization. So I'm definitely in favor of that. And I do think it's possible. And I do think AI can help us get there by challenging us on these points and saying, hey, that group that you've already dismissed as an out group, what if I told you this story about this person? What if I introduced you to this person? That kind of stuff. And, there's all kinds of social movements that have sprung up that allow people of different political opinions to come together in a room and talk with one another. Again, it's not that anyone has to change their mind, but they can say, hey, you know what? I really like that person. I thought that was a cool person, a sweet person, a nice person. And now I understand that somebody who I have seen with my own eyes has a different opinion on this than I do.
Is that wishful thinking to some degree?
I don't think so, because these things are happening all over the place, and
the macro is division, isn't it? It's polarization, echo chambers. There's now 20 social networks, some crazy number, that have more than 20 million people on them, which means that social networks are splintering off into niches and interests, and there's like Rumble and Bumble, and there's like Threads and X and Facebook, Snap, Instagram, and what we're seeing is more and more interest group. And also the other thing with algorithms is we went from having a social graph where if I had 1,000 people follow me, those 1,000 people would see my stuff, to now these interest graphs where it doesn't matter if I have 1 follower or 1 million followers, the algorithm's going to decide who's interested in that thing, and it's going to serve it to them because that's the most retentive thing if you're a publicly listed company that's driven by ad revenue. So you've got this algorithm that's actually forcing you into into tighter and tighter echo chambers. And even as someone that's been on social media 15 years and ran social media companies, this is one of the great things I've noticed is when I had 1 million followers back in the day, I would reach those people because they'd hit follow or subscribe. Now, even on our YouTube channel, 61% of you don't subscribe. And please subscribe. And that's in part because the algorithm is now doing the work of deciding who to show it to, who it will resonate on the basis of who will be retained.
Yeah. Here's what I would say. There's absolutely nothing new about echo chambers because it was always the case that your neighbors and your community and whatever, that's what you thought was reality. I'm actually quite optimistic about the mere existence of the internet, because at least we are exposed to the fact that there are lots of different points of view. It used to be in places like the USSR, they controlled the media tightly so that everything you saw was a news approved story. But now you see all the points of view. Now, many of them might drive you crazy and whatever, but at least you know that there are people out there that believe in that. And I think that's really useful. If I had to decide between state control where there's a single story or seeing the whole messy spectrum of opinions, I'd rather see the latter.
What about the middle? They always, one of the phrases that's, again, a principle that's helped me think is that the truth is in the middle. And generally I try and understand what the middle looks like. So you've got state controlled over here. You've got aggressive algorithm that's sort of reinforcing whatever you currently believe, is there not some kind of middle ground where the algorithms have to let up a little bit? And of course, we're not going to go for state controlled.
Here's my prediction in 2026 is that there is a market opportunity for a new social media company to come along, because everybody is aware of exactly this problem that you're pointing out. Everyone hates when they surf and they get served exactly what they're supposed to get served, and they get off after an hour or two and they feel like they've wasted their lives. I think there's a real opportunity for a social media company to come along and say, you know what, we're not building our algorithm like the other guys. It's not about just trying to get engagement at any cost with, incendiary posts, but instead we're looking for ways to connect people. So if you and I both love this particular thing, this particular cuisine or location or whatever it is, we get connected, we see each other's stuff, and the algorithm carefully temporally sequences things so that we come to have a certain connection threshold before we find out, whoa, you have a totally different political opinion than I do on subject X. Wow, I didn't know that, but I really like Steven, so I'm going to lean in and listen a little bit more. I think this is very easy to do, and I think that can actually be part of the selling point of the media company, is saying, hey, we are here not to enrage you, but to actually build connection.
It sounds like how social media started.
Yeah,
and
maybe it's a return.
I think there's probably a neuroscience basis as to why we ended up here.
No, it's an economics basis. But the fact is, there's now an economic opportunity now that everyone sees the landscape.
What I'm trying to say is that social network wouldn't be that retentive by design, because it wouldn't trigger my dopamine. It wouldn't be a slot machine. Like TikTok is a slot machine. Ping, ping, randomized returns, ping, 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 dopamine hit, ping, ping, ping. So this other social network that wasn't playing with my dopamine in such a way, I don't know whether I'd be addicted enough to return. Therefore, they wouldn't sell their ads, the economic return. Therefore, they wouldn't do very well.
Here's the thing. I don't know if the story is that simple that we all want to do slot machines all the time.
I don't think we do.
Exactly. Because the fact is that a lot of people go to Las Vegas and do slot machines sometime, but we don't do that all the time. It's kind of rare, actually. What we really desire are meaningful connections. We really desire feeling like, hey, you know what? I met this person online that I'm following and he's following me, and we really connect on all these points. And oh, by the way, I then found out, interestingly, he's got a totally different opinion about Iran or abortion or whatever than I do, but that's cool. Now we're listening to each other.
It kind of goes back to your point earlier about at the very start where we were talking about, the brain having an internal battle. Like, do I want the cookie or do I want the salad?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in the world we live in, the cookie is going to give me a dopamine hit.
Yes, but we don't eat cookies all the time. This is the point. We do eat salads much of the time because we're not just unconscious automaton that are doing the cookies.
Dr. David Eagleman, thank you so much for the work that you do. I'm going to link your book below so everyone can read this book. You've got a new book on the way, which I'm very excited about as well. What's that book going to be about, and when is that out?
That's about the Ulysses contract, and that'll come out in 2027.
In June. Okay. For anyone that wants to know how to change your life by changing your brain, I think this is the perfect book to read. It's a New York Times best-selling author. And the book is absolutely fascinating. It was actually learning about this subject matter in Livewired that helped me to pursue more of a growth mindset and just a growth mentality across my life, and to realize that if I'm not something now, it doesn't mean that I can't be tomorrow. So thank you so much for the work that you do, David. And it's been truly illuminating. I'm sure my neural pathways have expanded in really important ways because of this.
Great. Thank you, Stephen.